Welcome everyone to the webinar, Understanding the Latest SEC Requirements and Responding to a Cyber Incident. I'm Alan Pogrzebelski, VP of Marketing here at Cygnus, and I'm pleased today to introduce you to Chris Hetner. Chris is a Senior Executive, Board Director, and leader in cybersecurity. He's currently a Cyber Risk Advisor to the National Association of Corporate Directors. He's also a former Senior Cybersecurity Advisor to the SEC Chair, and he's a former senior member of the U.S. Department of Treasury's Financial Banking Information Infrastructure Committee. In addition to speaking as an expert on webinars like this one, you may also have read his articles in places like the World Economic Forum. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here, Alan. Thank you so much.
Well, it is exciting to have you. Let's start with the process here. Rather than traditional slides, we're going to treat this as just a normal conversation between two people in a more casual environment. So why don't we get started with the first concept, and that is about cybersecurity and risk governance. Now, you've mentioned that there's a schism to people in terms of how the world looks at cybersecurity risk governance. From a big picture standpoint, what's the right lens to look at this topic?
That's a great point here, Alan. So, historically, cybersecurity has been, treated as a deep technical issue. We've got various types of historical perspectives as relates to, the types of technologies we're reliant on, the advent of, the personal computer, then eventually to broad-based data centers, the World Wide Web, the internet. And, we're now at a place where, we've got the number of devices in relationship to humans, like 10 to 1 relationship. So we're the machines are here and it's evolving. And so with that is dependency on global commerce, dependency on the functioning and the health of our US capital markets. We've seen recently with the technology outage that was experienced between Microsoft and CrowdStrike that took down thousands of flights and unable to process and continue business. So it's become integral in terms of our modality around how we function our businesses, how we operate our businesses, how we rely on these key systems to deliver our operations. In some cases, there are legal and regulatory components there that might have an impact. And then, of course, there's the financial component as well. And so, how I advise corporate directors and CEOs and boards to think about this through the lens of, your reliance on technology, its relationship to the cyber threat landscape, and how those threats can introduce material business, operational, financial harm to you as a specific company. And then once you understand that view, where do you deploy investments and capital to suppress that risk or de-risk your business? And treating this as no different than any other risk you might have to your organization, whether it's making, an investment, it's acquiring a company, it's getting access to capital. It should be treated through a very similar lens in terms of how the enterprise risk management organization views a broad range of risks.
Got it. That's really helpful, Chris. So let's get into it. We know that there's all kinds of new cybersecurity risk governance rules out there. And you mentioned some really big changes. Can you tell us all about those?
Yeah, what's happening is, again, the amount of stakeholders that are interested in cyber is broadening. It's beyond just the IT function. It's beyond just the cybersecurity function. It's investors, it's, shareholders in the company. It's directors and officers, it's academia, it's government, it's regulators. And so with that is a broader set of individuals and various stakeholders that are now interested in how cyber security is being treated from a risk management standpoint, as well as from a governance perspective. And so the regulations are, reinforcing that demand pull in terms of, broadening the aperture. And so when we think about the new SEC cybersecurity disclosures, that's really about two pieces. One, disclosing how you govern cybersecurity, and the investor community wants to know how this is being treated, all the way upstream to the board. What's the level of oversight the board has? What's the touch point between the cybersecurity function and the board? What's the substance behind how you govern cybersecurity? Are you just checking the box, or is this really ingrained as part of your culture, as part of your enterprise risk management framework? So that's one piece of the regulation. Then the second is really around reacting to cyber events. Whether it's malicious, whether it's not malicious. You had an event, and now it's time to assess the material impact to your business, to your operation, to your financials. And that's another piece of the disclosure where the investor community wants to know, what did this thing cost you, and how did you respond? And so really it's increasing the amount of individuals that are now interested. And this extends beyond the SEC. There's new regulations coming out of Europe, DORA, for example, that holds corporate directors responsible for oversight of cybersecurity. There's increasing regulations around artificial intelligence. In the financial services and banking community, that ecosystem have historically had heightened cybersecurity regulations from the U.S. federal government, whether it be the Federal Reserve Bank, the OCC, and so there's historical precedence in terms of these heightened regulatory requirements impacting certain sectors, namely financial services. But with the broadening landscape and view as to how these threats are impacting companies' balance sheets and their organizational construct, their operational impact, these types of disclosures are now creating a wider cast net across the landscape.
Okay. Okay. So, so let me ask you this though. You talked a little bit about risk. What's the right way to quantify risk? What's the right way to look at this?
So the way, we don't really necessarily rely on the word of quantification of risk as it pertains to cyber. We look at, within the NACD community, we've taken an approach that applies a very similar method that the insurance markets look to project where those losses are likely going to occur on a particular company's balance sheet. And it's an annual projection. It's looking at your company's profile. It's aligning the company profile to firmographic data such as revenue, industry alignments. Healthcare is going to look different than manufacturing, is going to look different compared to banking. We also look at the types of records that you may possess. Do you have PHI data? Do you have PII? Are you heavily reliant on intellectual property that's very specific to your company? And with that, data set around the firmographic profile, the way we look at the projected losses, again, is through the lens of that annual loss expectancy, based on your business profile, based on historical data, based on current real world effects that are impacting either you as a company or your sector, bringing that data informed approach to identify where those most likely losses are going to occur. And so that's why we kind of remove ourselves from quantification. It's really about cybersecurity risk management lifecycle. So once you have that data informed approach, based on those losses, based on those historical perspectives, and how effective your defenses are, or how effective your investments are in order to de-risk yourself, that gives you the balance in terms of, okay, so here's where the most material exposures are. If we have a ransomware event that, let's say, results in a 48-hour outage, that's most likely going to cost us $100 million. How do we de-risk ourselves from that type of outage? Well, you invest into backups, you invest into immutable backups, you create network segmentation, perhaps you double down on multi-factor authentication, user training and awareness. So that's an approach that we've taken through the National Association of Corporate Directors, and aligns very closely with how the insurance markets ultimately serve as the arbiter for cyber risk management.
Right. Let's switch gears for a minute. Now, many of us may not have been involved with working with boards at the level that we are talking about today. I'd like to share with you a little bit about what the key considerations are in working with boards and what does it mean to be working with them to be effective.
The boardroom, it's a very sophisticated community. I mean, these folks are, ranging in age. They could be active as an executive. They could be retired as an executive. Former CEOs, former CFOs. We see a mix of, accountants. We see an emerging board member that has perhaps an IT background or an operations background. But these are folks that are very sophisticated, but they also have a fairly full plate of matters that they're trying to address. And cyber is a component, but there are also other facets that they're dealing with, whether it's go to market, strategy, are we making the right investments? Do we have investor profiles that are aligned with our strategy? Are we meeting revenue targets? And so what the board wants to know, given this full agenda, as it pertains to cyber, they don't need an exhaustive deep dive in terms of the intricacies of your network and network diagrams and patching metrics and operational metrics around mean time to detect and respond. You might as well be speaking a different language to the board. What the board wants to know is, based on our industry profile, based on our revenue types, what threats are most likely going to introduce material business, legal, operational, regulatory, and financial impact to our company? How are we de-risking from these potential impacts in terms of capital deployment and investment? Are we over-investing in certain areas? Are we under-investing in certain areas? We see a lot of fatigue with the CISO community asking for additional dollars with the CFO and the audit committee because they continue to see the attacks occur, and there's very limited visibility in terms of where that capital is being deployed. So what the board wants to know is, very efficiently, where is that capital being deployed? How do we de-risk our company? If we have an event or we're dealing with a cyber event, how much of this is covered by insurance? What's our residual impact? And how are we dealing with it? And what's that number relative to our top line revenue? So, we've seen, I won't name names, but we've seen companies take hundreds of millions of dollars in write-downs across various sectors, whether you're a healthcare company, a manufacturer, you could be a tech company, you could be a gaming platform. And it ranges. Ransomware seems to be a prominent event and category that we see. But at the end of the day, these companies are taking hundreds of millions of dollars in write-downs and they're disclosing. And in many cases, if you look at that $100 million exposure, it's a fraction of a percent of top line revenue. And the CEO and the board wants to know, okay, so this is what this thing's going to cost me. And here it is relative to our revenues. Project that with confidence and then start deploying capital investments in order to de-risk the company going forward. So it's really using that business orientation as to how to be effective in the boardroom.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this. So looking forward, we talked about some of the SEC regulations that are affecting us today. What are the big trends you're seeing in cybersecurity regulations, and what are the key themes that you're seeing?
We're seeing an emphasis on materiality. Materiality has both qualitative and quantitative measures. Qualitative could be, brand reputation. It could be, perhaps a loss of customer confidence, a loss in investor confidence. But then there's also the quantitative measures. What's the impact to our operations? How much of this is impacting our balance sheet, our stock price? Do we have any counterparty risk? Do we have any supply chain risk? And so it's really through those two lenses where we see most of the regulations happening. And then secondly, it's centered around how effective are you managing the risk associated with the threats that are introducing that exposure. And so how are you governing that effectively all the way upstream to the boardroom? And so that's where the, kind of the regulatory, to use the hockey analogy, the hockey puck is moving towards further enterprise risk management, further boardroom accountability and oversight.
Got it. Got it. Hey, I just want to mention really quickly, I've been seeing a couple questions pop up in the chat window. If you do have some questions, go ahead and just type them in. If we have time at the end, we'll get to as many as we can. If we can't, we'll certainly follow up with you after the event. So let's talk about one more topic that's near and dear to everyone's heart, which is compliance. How should teams be demonstrating compliance with these regulations? How do you show your work?
The way you show your work is through documentation. It's defining process. It's getting the right people on the same page, but it's also exercising those processes. It's performing tabletop exercises or drills, and through that process, whether it be quarterly, annually, semi-annual, it's building that muscle mass to make sure that when the event occurs, that you've got a compliant platform and capability, and that you're documenting. I will tell you, based on every tabletop exercise I've conducted, I'm always learning something new. And you're bringing in beyond just the IT organization, you're bringing in the whole of the enterprise, which gets to that enterprise risk management organization. So that's really a key piece is the continuous exercising and documentation.
That's exciting. For all of us at Cygnus, that is music to our ears because we do have the ability to do tabletop exercises in our solution, and there is that complete audit trail that stays within the solution. Uh, so great news. Why don't we do this? We'll take just a couple questions now before we wrap up today. I see a couple in the window. Um, the first one is what does materiality really mean through the lens of these new SEC regulations? Do you mind commenting on that?
Yeah, so when I was in the chair's office, we thought about this, and it's reflected in the 2018 interpretive guidance, but really it's carried through in the new disclosure requirements. It's thinking about the business financial factors as it relates to the incident impact and the types of costs and adverse consequences that a company may realize. And I'll just enumerate some examples here. There's the cost associated with the business interruption event. There's always decreases in production, delays in product launches. There's, in the case of ransomware and other extortion demands, there's the actual payment of the ransom, but there's also the potential loss of data. There's remediation costs such as liability of stolen assets or information, the repairs of and restoring systems based on damages, and even incentives to retain customers or retain business partners in an effort to maintain those relationships after a cyber event. And then, of course, there's the increased protection costs, which may include increased insurance premiums or the cost to make organizational changes, deploying of additional personnel, deploying advanced protective technologies that haven't been budgeted for, training employees, engaging third-party experts and consultants. These are all losses that may be realized from a balance sheet perspective in cost. And what about cost associated with lost revenues resulting from intellectual property theft or the unauthorized use of proprietary information or the failure to retain or attract customers following an attack? And then, of course, what we see increasing given the legal and regulatory environment are litigation costs, legal risk exposure, regulatory actions, class action suits, and those can be very costly. And some companies have realized class action suits that have cost them $500 million to $1 billion as a result of these types of attacks. And these legal consequences aren't necessarily realized within the short term. They usually realize on the tail end. And then, of course, there's harm to employees, harm to customers, violation of privacy laws, and then, of course, damage to the company's competitiveness. And as I enumerate these principles here, this is the language of the board. This is the language of the connectivity between the cybersecurity organization and the general counsel. And these are the key pillars for determining materiality.
Great. Now, I think we have time for just one more question. I'm looking at quite a few in here. Chris, is there a favorite that you want to pick up?
Go for it. You pick it. I'll leave it to you.
Well, there is a little further question about about the role of security in IT, specifically
Yeah,
around materiality and what their piece is. You mind sharing any feedback on that?
it's a great question, and we see these challenges day in and day out, where you have IT technology organization focused on operations, right? Focused on uptime, making sure the lights are kept on, and then you have the security organization over here to the right that's trying to protect ourselves and maintaining um, a level of security across that technology environment. So there's definitely an important dynamic there to play, and there should be some checks and balances between security, using more of a risk management focus versus the technology operation. So it's healthy to have that independence, if that makes any sense, Alan.
Mhm.
But really, in terms of materiality, and you're in the proverbial knife fight when the event happens, the security team is there to prevent the attack from propagating further. So, we shut the doors down. We restricted the threat actor to this one database, and now let's present the facts. How do they get into the environment? How many records did they lose or was stolen potentially? How do we get them off our network? How do we, restore these systems? And the security team is there to present these facts. And those facts are super critical to help inform materiality. Because, well, let's pretend it's a data loss event. Somebody came in, they stole 1 million records. Let's keep the record type aside. They stole 1 million records. Well, I present the facts to my enterprise risk management team. I work with inside counsel, outside counsel. Here's the number of records. Here are the type of records. Here are the facts. It's 1 million records. That's the securities team role in that process. Now, materiality now plays in with enterprise risk management, including inside counsel, outside counsel. Say, okay, based on this record type, each record is going to cost us $100. Again, I'm making up the number, to recover. Maybe we need to do some type of data breach notification or data protection, identity theft protection. Maybe the records are tied to intellectual property, right? That are tied to a new product launch that really we don't want public at this point. So again, the security team is there to present the facts, mitigate the risk, mitigate the exposure, but materiality is ultimately determined by enterprise risk management, including the general counsel, and in many cases, outside counsel. So there you go.
Awesome. That's super helpful, Chris. Well, I know we're out of time, Chris, but I want to thank you for all the information you provided us today. This has been great to have you on this webinar. To our audience, thanks for attending as well, too. We're going to make sure that we follow up with you all for all the questions that weren't answered on this webinar via email. Thank you all for attending this Cygnus webcast. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you, Alan.